Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights. And today, I'm really pleased to have a guest come and join us to present to us the session she did at the recent BA conference in Europe on the topic of when life gives you lemons and how to build your BA survival kit. I'm looking forward to the session that Charley's going to share with us shortly. Before we get into that, if there's anyone that hasn't subscribed, please do. If you like the video, please drop a like on it as well. And really good to hear your comments and your perspective from a similar situation. So look forward to your comments. But on to the session.
So hi, I'm Charley Bayley. I'm a senior business analyst working at the University of York.
Brilliant, thank you, Charley. And I look forward to the session. Thank you very much for coming along and sharing the session that you hosted at the recent BA conference. Definitely looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, because it's one of the most interesting titles, I should say, from the conference.
Yeah, and I think, being able to present it again to a different audience is great. So, when life gives you lemons, what prompted this topic was I was sat in a program team meeting and everyone was sat there with their heads in their hands and they were saying, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what's going on in 2 weeks' time. I don't know what my role is. I don't want to let everyone down. So what is going on? So my team, we were handed a lemon. So it turns out the big transformation program we were working on had taken another twist. So let me go back a little bit and show you some of the twists that we'd had before that. So back in July 23, I was starting to work on replacing our HR system at the University of York. It seemed really simple, driven by an end of life deadline, I'm sure is quite relatable. So that's where we're going. We started engaging with suppliers, started going down procurement. But then we were handed a lemon and we had to expand the scope, and it was business transformation enabled by technology. Very different set of stakeholders, very different sponsor. And that was our first twist. So we were writing a business case and thinking about different partners in order to help us with this transformation. And then the next twist was when we were starting to think about what the solution was, we really were looking at everything from that kind of sticking plaster, what's the cheapest, best of breed we could get in, to, well, let's be a bit more ambitious. What's the kind of future of HR and what's the HR team that our organisation needs? So we really were grappling with all of these decisions. And then partway through, our chief operating officer left and we got a new sponsor, and they came in and they said, well, we're going to go for ERP, and another twist in December, we've got to add finance to the scope as well because that system's going out for support. So all of these twists had happened over that period of time, leading us now to a HR and finance transformation enabled by Workday. So we'd had all of those lemons, we'd twisted and pivoted, and then my team and I were sat there at the point where we were thrown into the deep end again and had this challenge that we had to overcome. And this is the largest program our university has tackled in 20 years. It's so complex, multifaceted. We've got loads of work streams. But actually, all of us, and particularly the BAs in the team, we already had all of the tools to kind of tackle this most recent lemon because we'd done it all before. So what I'm hoping to do is just go over some of the really common challenges that we'd had during this journey. I'm hoping they'll be really relatable, whether you're working on a similar ERP program or any project. I think they're really common scenarios, and then just trying to share some of the things that helped me, helped my colleagues. And they're not magic bullets. They're not going to instantly solve it, but I'm hoping just by sharing some of my experiences that at least somebody can take something away from this. So
the change of scope so far, Charley, looks familiar anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So these are the common themes, navigating uncertainty, juggling volatile priorities, constant work peaks, and overwhelmed stakeholders. And, if you're looking at this and thinking, I've got the bingo card, I've got all of those at once. Yeah, you can be unlucky and have more than one at each time. So just taking them through then. So navigating uncertainty, and it's really tough because even though we're used to uncovering problems and try and work through problems, when you're navigating through that much uncertainty about what your role is, what your purpose is, what are the people around you, what's the plan, it can really start to unravel. So I think what you have to do is you do have to try and learn to sit comfortably enough with ambiguity, and know that it won't be forever, and focus on some of the questions, or some of the questions you can ask, or answers that you have now, or answers that you might have in the future. And I think this is where, as a BA, we focus on what does the business need from me? What's the right business outcome at this stage? And sometimes just by honing in on that and staying outcome focused, we can be of the greatest benefit during all of this uncertainty. And then what we had to do as a team is to really try and look at our tools and techniques and how could we build even more flexibility into them. Ooh. Not sure if you can see that.
Yeah, I can still see the slide on navigating uncertainty.
Oh, right. I've just got, you must restart your computer. It's all right, gone. Sorry. Yeah, so you can build flexibility into your tools and techniques. So some of the things that we did is think of our discovery as a bit like an onion. So when you're first tackling kind of an unknown, how can you kind of then delve through those first sets of questions that get you that first bit of clarity, and then kind of stop at that point and then reassess and work out, do we need to go further? That can be one way that we flipped it. So the kind of discovery needs started evolving as we were going along, and it meant that we could adapt a bit more. And then we really had to hone in our critical thinking and our curiosity. So trying to get curious with the situation, all those kind of what do we know, the assumptions, and just get all of our templates ready. We've all got templates hiding away, but how often do you have to like kind of update them a little bit or realize that something needs doing? But when you need to act quickly and rapidly, it's if you've got them all ready to go to. So those were some of the simple things we did. And then just try and do that as easy as it is, but that kind of planning where you plan really well in the near future and then you leave it sketched out. Don't worry too much about planning too far ahead, and just keep doing that as you're going along. I find this is the hardest one because you can't just instantly get better at dealing with uncertainty. But I think you can, each time it comes along, you can kind of just shift your focus and try and get a little bit more comfortable. No one ever is fully comfortable with it, I don't think.
No, I think that's probably fair actually. But certainly from my experience, the more you get exposed to discomfort and changing scenarios and situations, you sort of get a little bit more relaxed about that being the case.
Yeah. So that's the first one. And I think this is, I've probably put the hardest one first. And then, after that, you've got juggling volatile priorities. So that's about everything needs doing now and everything's really important. So then how do you kind of manage that? And I think the analogy is like playing kind of chess on a moving train, like everything's shifting all at once. But so whilst we can't eliminate this, we can tame it. So we can do what we're there to do, which is we try and get that clarity amid the chaos. So we're the ones that can really anchor to the North Star, like why are we here? What's the objective of this project or this piece of work? And try and remind everyone of that and bring them out of sometimes the chaos and the running around and some of the detail, and just bring everyone and say, right, what is the most important thing at the moment? What would happen if we don't do this? What carries the greatest risk? And try and help people kind of take that step back and take perspective during these situations. And then the closer we are to kind of what we need to achieve from a project or an initiative, it means we can help with some of the decision making around it. You know, we can use frameworks to help weigh up. We could do A or B. How much will A help us get to that outcome versus B? You know, we can help be that facilitator for people during this period where everything's on fire. And then I think what BAs are really good at is the what if, you know, that scenario planning. What if this happened? What would we do? So we can help, you know, coach people at that point in time. I'm trying to think. Stakeholder diplomacy. I think when tensions arise, sometimes you've got one person that's really disgruntled that you're not working on their thing when you're working on someone else's. So I think sometimes the more transparent you are about what you're choosing not to do, as well as what you're choosing to do, can really help, you know, and you're all in it together and you're all trying to get there, and you build that trust by staying transparent, or you know, bringing people into the solving the problem. So we've only got this amount of time. We know that's important. We know that's important. Which one do you need to make, you know, which one's going to be the greatest value to you, or which one's most critical? And then you invite people to help you prioritize. No one likes doing it, but I think the more that you stay that sort of, you build up that trust and that relationship with people.
And presumably you
So
can
that's,
take a view as well from the organisation's perspective on that one, Charlie, in that if you've got
yeah.
different people with a view that not necessarily selfish, but it isn't, you know, that you want to try and push forward things that are of best interest, they get, or the best interests of the organisation you're in.
Yeah, and something I've learned that even, you know, even more the most senior colleagues who are in leadership positions where they do need to understand the holistic organizational perspective, they are still there to represent and champion their areas and to achieve their objectives. So everyone does have their own worldview, and sometimes it does need that neutral facilitator to help them see that maybe they've got competing priorities or even very similar aims, and you might be able to cover them together. And then cognitive flexibility is an interesting one. So it's we all know that we shouldn't multitask, but what happens when you do have to switch from one thing to another, or you do have to do have that kind of context switching because you are juggling a few things at once. So there's some really easy ways of, you know, laying down those kind of mental bookmarks when you finish off a piece of work. Sometimes just write yourself a little note of like, next I was going to do X, Y, and Z, so that you're helping yourself when you then pick it up again.
Yeah.
And we know that it's harder under stress to keep switching between contexts. So if you know for that period of time you are having to juggle, you know, that's where thinking about where the sources of stress are and can you work on that if you are really having to switch all the time. That's kind of how some of the ways that we've helped during these sort of particularly volatile situations.
I imagine in that case, Charlie, that everybody has slightly different ways of managing that volatility. And if you can be transparent with how you manage it, you might be open to finding ways that your colleagues are doing things a little bit better than you, so you can make it part of your own way of working.
Yeah, exactly. And then there is one particular technique I found really interesting when we were thinking about you know, trying to prioritize and working out what's really important. So the MTO technique, so minimum target outrageous. So the idea of this is that if you're working on something, you can set yourself 3 targets. You can say, what's the minimum that I could do on this based on past performance, reality, like what you've actually achieved. And then target is a little bit more, and outrageous is what you know you can't achieve, which is a bit odd, writing down or saying out loud what an outrageous outcome of something is. But to put it into context, when I was I was helping to put together a kind of high level target operating model for our finance team. because we needed that information before we could put it in the business case or go out to procurement. And I was my outrageous was really trying to achieve the same high quality outcome that we'd achieved in about 3 times the amount of time and more resource, including an external consultant. And then minimum, was more like the right conversations, jotted down slightly messily on documents, saved in folders. But it did the job. And that's actually what we achieved in the end. I think sometimes we don't realize how high the bar is that we're setting ourselves until you say out loud what you're actually trying to hit.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's really interesting because it makes me think that someone's minimum might be someone else's outrageous and vice versa.
Yeah. And I think this is particularly good if you are a person that's kind of quite proud of your high standards and, you are a high performer. Sometimes the environment and the situation just means you can't. So it's about keeping it realistic.
Hmm. Yeah,
So that's volatile priorities and then constant workload peaks. And I'm sure everyone's been there where you're like, you just really nail it until the deadline hits. And then something else, and you can't slow down. You need to ramp up again and again and again, and there's no natural pause. So this is where what I was saying before about that adaptive analysis. Can you chunk up what you're doing into smaller pieces so that each time you can reassess it and say, do we still need that? So you can help manage your workload a lot better. And then the other way you can do, so we did this where we had a sizable amount of discovery work to do in a short period of time, and there was a number of BAs working on it. So we had a really long list. Normally, we would plan and deliver our own work, but in this instance, by all joining forces, dividing and conquering, every week we could then kind of check back in and say, right, I've got this far in it. I think this is where we need to. We could go into more, but I think it could wait until a later stage. So you're all kind of talking through that together, and not one person is sat there drowning in the expectations of all the work that needs doing. So sometimes you have to sort of reflect the environment by switching up how you work as well. Then by having that kind of shared workload, we were able to help with some of the escalations a bit more, and we had that bit more structure, and we could raise risks slightly better. No one's you're not hiding them, we're keeping them visible. And it's all about team capacity rather than individual, what one person can or can't do in that time. And I think that can be quite difficult on an individual, if it's a really hectic time. And then this is where that sort of energy management really comes into play. Now, I'm somebody who I feel like my body battery is like quite a small capacity. I think some people have got bigger batteries than I have. And I have to think a bit more about how I use my energy in the right way over, course of a day or a week or a month. And, that's thinking about knowing what hours of the day you work best. There's that saying, swallow the frog, do the hardest thing first at the start of the day when you've got the most momentum, rather than put it off throughout the day and you're not going to get to it.
definitely relate to that.
What time of day are you most productive, would you say, John?
Generally, the mornings, actually, I think, and I wonder if that's as a result sometimes that it can take colleagues or stakeholders you're working with a few hours to sort of get things off their desk that they need to look at first. Whereas in the afternoon, perhaps they've already cleared those things and therefore they're free to interrupt me, as it were.
So that's
Although
when you get your
they
kind
do.
of like focus time. Yeah, your uninterrupted focus time. So what you do is, I imagine you plan some of your tasks for that time.
Yeah, certainly try to. Although I guess as a consultant and as a BA as well, you tend to be reacting a lot to when stakeholders are most able to work with you. So I find I'm probably not as rigid as I once was in terms of my best hour of the day is it's probably not that consistent. I tend to be able to move it around throughout the week.
Yeah. But I think knowing if you have to push through it, that you're going to be a bit drained is quite helpful as well. And
Yeah.
then, you can look to see what you're doing in the other hours of your week to balance it out or do some of those things that top you up. I think being quite aware of it, even if you know you've got a busy week, knowing you're going to be drained
Mm.
is better than just sort of it happening without you being conscious of it. And so the really big thing here is when you're working in a period of time or a project or a program where you have these peaks, there will never be kind of the right time to go on holiday, go have that lunch with a friend that you've been putting off. So I think where you can, you need to kind of put that in for yourself.
Sometimes where it feels like it's sort of routine and notice for others can help. So, for example, if you're somebody that leaves every day at 5:30, it doesn't take very long for people to get used to that work around that constraint. Rather than
Mm.
if you tend to be quite if we just take the leaving time as an example. You're somebody that you don't necessarily have a fixed time and you sort of leave when the work is done. That could be 8 or 9 o'clock. I wonder if certain individuals might take advantage of that.
Mm. And people work in different ways. Some people like to split it up, and I'm the sort of person that once I've gone home and had dinner, that's it. I don't want to go back to opening the laptop and going on to
Yeah.
work. But some people actually enjoy that break and find that having a break and doing some other stuff and then coming back to it actually is more productive than just staying and
Mm.
pushing through. And I know there's a lot of parents who will do that and work in the evenings, and that's how they manage to fit around that kind of schedule. So yeah, it is very individual, isn't it? But it's worth
That's right.
experimenting, especially if what you're working on changes a little bit. You can try these experiments on how you structure things.
On a related note, I mean, I found that even in a really busy situation, a really busy project, it might seem counterintuitive what I'm about to say, but someone's just taking half an hour away from the desk to have a wander around outside and get some air. It's just a good way to sort of organise your thoughts. So when you come back, you tend to be far more efficient. So that more than compensates for that half hour off the desk. Whereas if I were to stay at the desk the whole day, I think my efficiency is going to be going down throughout the day probably.
Yeah, and that's the example of something knowing what works for you and kind of helps boost you. I did read a really interesting article on the impact of like high ceilings and nature, and how that can impact creativity. Sometimes if you want to do something, and walking is really good for creativity as well. So yeah, I'm sure it's,
Yeah.
a bit more sophisticated than a bit of blood pumping to the brain, but there's something going on there that, it's worth bearing in mind. Just sitting stuck to your laptop isn't always the best route.
I think that's it. And it just perhaps sometimes just being out in the fresh air. You probably haven't got a phone. Certainly haven't got people coming up to you and asking you questions all the time. So it gives you a bit of space to think. Perhaps that's probably one of the reasons.
Yeah, definitely. So that's workload peaks. And then the last one is overwhelmed stakeholders. So this is less about us, but more, an overwhelmed, we can put the best laid plans together, but an overwhelmed stakeholder that won't, can't make those decisions when you've brought them the right information, they can be as much of a blocker as anything else on this sort of program. So what we can do is, use our empathy and our understanding of people and try and get to the root of like using that relationship you may have built up with them, or maybe use that as an opportunity to build up that relationship. Think about why might they be overwhelmed? Is it kind of how they like to work? You know, they're a big face-to-face person, but there's been loads of online meetings and you're seeing them disengaged. It's about thinking about what's important in their role, what's their worldview. So really getting to the bottom of understanding that person and then what's happening in their space can make a big difference. And sometimes you just being that listening ear. I think sometimes as BAs, we're a really good sort of trusted partner. And I don't know about you, but people will confide in me in ways that they don't necessarily do with some other roles, because sometimes we do just sit and listen and let them say what's going on in their world.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think I like to think most BAs are good listeners, as it's probably the biggest skill we have to some degree.
Yeah, and I think it's listening and like really recognizing the particular challenges they might have. That might be, resourcing. They might have had a couple of colleagues leave in their team and they're really trying to battle that whilst you're asking for work to be done. And, I think sometimes just appreciating the struggles they've got and how can you kind of balance that with the asks that you need. And then sometimes it's about those decision support tools. So using a bit like we had before, but what can you bring to the table to help facilitate the decision making? So sometimes it's those frameworks, it's us pulling together that options analysis for them, bring it to the right level that that person wants to see. Is it really detailed? Is it very high level? Target that information at the right level. And then sometimes, we've got some stakeholders where putting time in their diary and telling them to read things, and you've put that time aside for them, is what they want. They ask for it. So that's how they manage their diary and their commitments so that you can get there. Or sometimes it's not best practice, but if people say haven't read documents prior to a meeting, sometimes just going silent for 5 minutes, letting everyone else read it, then carrying on is actually much more productive.
Yeah.
It's not how you would intend it to be, but sometimes it is just that. Or what I find sometimes is, especially with our program board, is, very senior people tend to have very packed diaries. So you might be meeting number 10 of the day. So their brains have gone to like 9 different contexts before you. And then even if the last meeting you had, you talked about this thing, just reset the scene for them. So remember last meeting we talked about this. Sometimes it's those really simple things. Just helping their brain settle back into the problem and catch up from the last thing that they were doing and then get back into your space. So sometimes it's just the little things that we can do to help our stakeholders that are overwhelmed. But the other thing is sometimes they really, really are like unable to support what you need at the moment. And then you can help them escalate that in the right way and frame it in the right way. Not just the problem, but what's the impact and what's some solutions we could do. So I think that's where we can really help be that partner during really sort of challenging times. So there you go. They're my 4 tricky challenges. But when I was writing this talk for the BA conference and thinking about, sharing some of my experience of working on a big ERP program, it really was just like, but that's survival. Everything I've talked about helps you get through that working day, working week. And is it just about survival? And that's where a really timely email came in my inbox from Happiful, and they talked about lemonading. So it's been researched, and they've had a look into it from kind of a mental health perspective, and they looked at a lot of people during the pandemic and how their mindset impacted how they felt. And I think this is where it's not about overlooking or that kind of being overly positive about a situation. You don't, it can still be extremely challenging, but it's about trying to find the opportunity in there. So here's something then, John. So I think all our favourite stories have got plot twists. That's my theory. But actually, in plot twists in real life are setbacks, failures, disasters. We don't call them a plot twist. We call them other things. So, can you think of a time that you had a plot twist happen in something you were working on? And was there a silver lining to that curveball? What actually like happened as a result of it, or some opportune thing happened?
I can think of many actually, and some of them sort of seem to have a similar pattern in terms of, you tend to you definitely learn from those experiences for one thing. I think a few of those experiences can really bring the team together that are working as part of that. So that maybe you can't necessarily make things better straight away, but certainly next time round, because you've all experienced it, you can sort of prepare better as a group for it as well. So that can help. Um, yeah, and I think another thing is just the sense of perspective, because I guess any difficult project, situation, interaction, they ultimately end, right? And things start picking up again. And to just pick up on a point you made earlier on with stakeholders, you can you can start to build a relationship with them, even if you might not have been able to initially because of certain situations. Maybe their workload, as the example you made. So yeah, there's always good to come out of those tricky situations. I guess the sort of the scenario you want to avoid, I suppose, or I want to avoid, is where those areas of trickiness, discomfort go on for too long because you don't get
Mm.
that pause to be able to learn from it and make it, and think about how you want to deal with it next time. But certainly having a sense of perspective next time is a good first start for me anyway.
Yeah. And I think, and I know in the conference, I got people to, really take a few minutes to think about their plot twists in their lives, and kind of share with people. And there was so much animation in the room when people were describing this. And I think this is lemonading in the essence is like it's the reframe, how we're thinking about the situation, not changing the situation, but just how we're thinking about it. And I think, you know, I'm not going to say that next time we have something major happen in our program, I'm just going to kind of glance into the room like plot twist to the board or my program manager. I don't think he'll appreciate that, but I've had it since I wrote the talk. I had some things come up and I just chuckled to myself, oh well, that's a plot twist. And it just makes it a bit easier to just accept it's happened. And then you're like, right, well, okay, now what?
That's it. I think they were maybe calling it a plot twist rather than you know, a change of scope or something that makes it feel a little bit more interesting and
Yeah.
maybe might encourage you to look at it a bit more as well.
It adds intrigue, doesn't it? So
Yes.
I did ask a couple of colleagues to share some of their plot twists for me. So here's one from one that worked in our kind of careers area, and her plot twist actually ended up in added value and a uniqueness, like a USP to what they were working on. I mean, this was you need a bit of time to look back and reflect on a plot twist like this, but this is a scenario that they absolutely did not want to happen and were not happy at the time. But looking back on it now, they'd seen something had happened. There's another one from my colleague who, you know, that classic thing of started to work on a small piece, just a small little upgrade. And then that kind of then exploded. And she was saying that, you know, even the dullest of topics need an advocate, that she learnt from this, and that her piece of analysis can really change the priorities for the business. It expanded because of the work she did. And actually, we've been left in a much more secure and much more, modern situation as a result of that plot twist that she had. And there you go. She's learnt some knowledge as well, and probably built some relationships and strengthened some networks. So I think plot twist is one thing, and I think sometimes you can't always see it at the time, but you can reflect back on it. But it's interesting the more you kind of exercise this little mindset shift the next time it comes up.
That's it. I mean,
Um,
I think of some products actually over the years that I can't think of necessarily which ones they are, but you hear stories of either products or medicines that have come about as an unexpected outcome of someone trying to
yeah,
do something else, and they've accidentally, a byproduct is realize another use for a product they were designing, and that other use is far better than what they're originally designing as a result of that plot twist, as you put it.
yeah, exactly. So I think that moral is like just, don't let that plot twist just kind of don't get stuck in it and don't kind of then think, right, what next? So the next little playful reframe I came across was curious explorer. So when you come across something that's a problem, can you turn it into a puzzle? And this is classic B8 territory of like, if the thing is broken, why is this broken? What's this trying to tell me? Um, and I think just trying to have it. This is much more about like that bringing that curiosity out. And again, you need to be in the right headspace for this. On certain days, you just, throw your hands up and be like, oh, that's it. I can't deal with this. But on other days, you might think, okay, we've had a lot of complaints about this particular thing. We're getting a lot of backlash of what we've done recently. It's really interesting. Like, but what's behind it? Why? What areas are these coming from? You're doing your own kind of like five whys root cause analysis on it. If you just kind of take that breath and move on from the initial, everything's gone wrong. What's the puzzle? What can you dig into? So that's the Curious Explorer, and it's very much a BA thing, but it's again, maybe there's some value in thinking about it in that time, oh well, this is not a problem, it's just a puzzle we need to look at. And that's this one, which I quite like.
It makes me. I think it will for someone at least prompt them to get out of the negative space that they might be in, that you naturally associate with uncovering a problem or being in the midst of trying to solve it, to then reframe it as, well, actually, let's think of it not as a problem, think of it as a puzzle. Let's think about it from a different perspective. How would I solve it? How would others solve it? And it can maybe sort of lift you out of the gloom and the negativity, which might put you in a
Yeah.
better sense of give you a better chance of solving the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what this one's all about. Um, the the next one is a side quest, which I love as well. So this is all about if you hit a blocker or a roadblock on a piece of work, how can you think instead of just seeing that as the dead end? Well, I can't do anything on this, I'm stuck. How could you use it instead as that invitation to take a productive detour? So it's always about this. Can you work on something that's related that will still inadvertently help get you to where you need to go? So I think this one you need to time correctly. There's the right environment and situation for it. But, if you're really blocked on a piece of work, could you go and have that chat with the person in another department you've been putting off for ages? Go and catch up with how things are for them and strengthen that relationship you've got, which you know that you'll use later on in the program, or maybe it's about doing that bit of training that's at the bottom of your lingering at the bottom of your to-do list. I like the productive detour aspect of it. It's not just, procrastinating with any random thing that you're thinking of at the time. It's like, how could I use this time well?
That resonates in terms of, I know we were talking earlier about the benefit of going for a walk sometimes,
Mm,
and I think it's not always about going for the walk or taking some time off. It's just having a different, looking at something different for a change, so that then you can come back to the problem. And just because you've left it for a little while, you can now see it through a different lens and therefore solve it. And I quite like this idea of a side quest because that extra time isn't really dead time. You're just doing something else useful, and you're sort of paying that forward for when you're ready to take advantage of that opportunity later, I suppose.
Yeah, and when I was looking into, I had some examples that brought this to life in the conference, and there's loads here where it can actually accelerate the main task that you were working on, sort of directly or indirectly as well. So I think it's just about, again, seeing it instead of as like, oh, the problem is that I can't work on this thing and I had nothing else on. I've got a couple of hours this afternoon that I really needed to work on this thing. You're flipping it into the opportunity instead.
This well, I think could be like to look at it a slightly different way, but using the same technique. Is that if you've got time that you need to spend with your team, your members of your team that is not directly working on the same piece of work, if you schedule it for a time it is in the middle of your day, then it'll provide that natural break from what you're doing. It'll probably provide them with a natural break, and it's productive because you're probably helping them out in some small way as you would have planned to anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of, yeah, thinking slightly differently about the situation.
Mm.
So that's the first three. And then the last one, make it ridiculous, is of kind of going up in the playfulness. So make it ridiculous, again, is probably you need to think carefully about who you're using this with and when and the context. But this is one of my favorite ones. So this is where when something is stuck, how do you make progress by embracing a wildly exaggerated solution? How do you go, and we've all seen those techniques where you're invited to just think really big, beyond what's possible. Um, and sometimes it's about that absurdity, that creativity, it seems absurd, and then there's like little threads that you can pull, and then you get something practical and innovative. So one that I've used before is the Dr. Pepper moment. Have you come across this, John?
I haven't, no, no. Well, I think so anyway.
So Dr. Pepper used to have the slogan, "What's the worst that can happen?" in their adverts.
Yeah.
So they had this advert. So 1999, a young Jesse Eisenberg goes into a supermarket to get a drink. And he spots his Dr. Pepper and says, "Oh, Dr. Pepper, what's the worst that can happen?" And then suddenly, like the whole contents of the fridge start falling on him. He's trapped. They call 911. They're going to have to cut him out. They use a chainsaw. They have to get all his clothes off to get him out. And then they're carrying him out of the store. It's full of reporters, and there's he's being broadcast live on TV. For him, he just went in to get a drink, and that is the worst that can happen. So I played this video to a group of stakeholders, and we were doing this activity, and then I kind of gave them the problem statement and just said, "What's the worst that can happen?" And you know, first it was kind of normal, and then it got big and then creative, and um, but I think the mood and the energy in the room really shifted, and what we were working on was really risk identification, which is pretty
Okay.
dull sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's what I got out of it as the output I needed. But actually it got them talking, it got them starting to introduce themselves to other stakeholders that they were going to be working with. And I think sometimes just scooping it right out into that absurdity thing that you can do. Um, and it provides that injection of playfulness and taking your brains far beyond it. And that's the kind of playful reframe. So I've got an example if you want it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Wow.
So a new feature is requested in a fitness tracker app. So when users reach milestones, they get these kind of digital badges and awards. Can you think of what the worst can happen from something like that? If you were working on this product team and they were saying, right, we're suggesting this feature.
Well, I mean, I'm immediately thinking of sort of like the comparisons with others that are using the app that the team. You find out that you've been walking 10 miles a day, sorry, 10 steps a day, which is awful. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, finding out that your manager, as a secret, like wasn't able to decide who was the best and most fitting for promotion, so it just based it based on your steps. I guess there's some pretty absurd things coming in
Yeah.
looking at that. None of them resonate with my own situation. I'm glad to say.
No, I like those. So this is an AI generated example, and it gave me this. So it's one scenario. So there's a bug in the logic. So it triggers other commands on devices. So that 10K steps sets off this chain reaction, and then I mean it's very wild. This a bug escalating to a global scale, international incidents. I mean it's absurd for sure. But if you were working on this and you had a team going really wild on this, actually this has gone down the kind of maybe security angle or making sure that what you're working on does that feature really impact anything else? Are we sure? Have we tested
Mm,
it? And you can see how you can work yourself back to sort of something quite sensible. Um,
yeah,
I had so I gave out some different examples in the room and got people to kind of talk in groups. And again, it was such a superb way to like finish the day because everyone it was the end of the day and everyone was kind of like looking at their watches and looking at when they're going to end. But actually, we finished it on a high, like just going wild with our imaginations of like these terrible scenarios, but humorous. But there's a nugget of truth in all of them. So yeah,
it
so
feels like
that's
it could be something to to apply as well when you're working on like, like really intricate details of analysis or process, whatever it might be, and you're sort of in that headspace of trying to get absolute perfection. And it's like, well, actually, what's the worst can happen if we just hand it over now? It's
yeah.
99% there versus spending hours more for the extra 1%.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can flip it sometimes if we're trying to think about what good looks like. Sometimes if you flip it and think, what, how could it go badly?
Mm,
And then you
yeah,
then work out how you can stop all those things from happening. I think sometimes maybe it's the way our brains are wired. Like sometimes, yeah, just flipping it makes it easier.
yeah. That it's just English mentality. I'm not entirely sure, but we tend to be a little bit more willing to talk about the things that can go wrong, what we don't like, than what we do, or what
Yeah,
went
complaining
well.
about the
Doesn't it?
weather and,
That's
oh,
it.
not
Yeah,
bad. Yeah, we have got kind of like a sort of slight negative lilt to it. But yeah, and I think this sort of unlocks something that helps you then move on in a different way. And
yeah,
sometimes you just need to pepper a bit of playfulness. I think sometimes it's particularly like I was saying, if we had this program going on quite a long time, so same people are being engaged over quite a long time. So if you can just introduce some of these playfulness elements, just keeps it a little bit more entertaining.
I think so. I mean, there's I think there's many lessons from this presentation, Charlie, that people could take. Like the playfulness, the sense of perspective. Recognizing that they're not the only ones, as an example, that are on projects that go wrong. To name many.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. If that's the main thing that people take away is that they're not alone in tackling some of these challenges, and that there's no you can try different things. Some of them are more successful than others. Some of them are easier. Some of them are harder to try and apply. And I think that was the way I was thinking about it, is that actually you can try all these different techniques, but sometimes things just are challenging and you do just get like thrown that lemon. So those mindsets are things that you can apply yourself, like irrespective of what's going on around you or how much you can influence. So I think, yeah, that's just ending on next time you get that lemon, what are you going to do with it?
Brilliant. There we go. And I like the fact you're carrying a prop around, Charlie, of the lemon.
Do you love it? So my mum made it for me.
But when you first waved it, I just assumed it was a real lemon until I just saw the eyes
No,
a minute ago. I
got
thought
the eyes and the face. No, it's adorable. Yeah, so thanks to my mum.
a nice reminder to carry around as well if you're in that situation. You think, oh, and then you can just take you back to this anyway. So, no, brilliant. No, I mean, yeah, as I said, so plenty to take away. Hopefully for the people watching this as well. I'm sure there will be. Um, no, I really appreciate you coming along, Charlie, and sharing the session that you did at the conference. Because it's obviously a shame that we can't all attend every session in every conference.
No, and yeah, and it's been really lovely to be able to sort of talk about this again. And you can see it's a topic I'm really quite passionate about. And yeah, I'm hoping that if anyone just applies one of those playful elements in their day, I think that would make me happy.
I think so. It makes me think as well because when I was at the conference, we were talking about BA enjoyment, and one of the topics that Claire introduced me to was energy accounting, which seems to have some parallels with what you were saying earlier on in terms of thinking about those things that energize you or those things that sap your energy as well. So it's quite a good technique in there to literally put it on a page and think about all those things that either positively or negatively impact your energy. And then you can, once you've got it on paper, it's almost more difficult to avoid it. But you can also share it with others, which is quite a nice way to let others know the sort of things that you don't always appreciate, perhaps.
Yeah, I think we've done that as a team. We've talked about what energizes me and kind of what drains me, and talked about it with our line managers and shared it with each other because it might be that the thing that energizes me is something that doesn't energize a colleague of mine. And if you can take advantage of that and, play to all your strengths, I think that, that can be really a really good thing, especially if you're working on one thing and then you can get chucked something really quite exciting.
That's it. Oh, thank you again, Charlie. Anyway, and we look forward to seeing more of you in the BA community. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, John.